friends. Welcome to our second Facebook Live of the summer. I am so glad that you guys are here and that you're joining me tonight as we chat about guided reading for the next few weeks. Tonight we're going to be diving into all of the things that happen at our guided reading table. So before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Amanda, and I am the blogger behind Mrs. Richardson's class. I have taught kindergarten and first grade for several years, and now I blog and do professional development. I am very passionate about all things balanced literacy, and so most of the time my professional development that I do is on all of the elements of balanced literacy, and a little bit of science is thrown in there too. So let's recap last week's Facebook Live. Last week was our first week of our guided reading series, and we talked about everything that happens before the students come to the table. So last week we talked about how to prepare our kids to come to the table. We talked, and I shared a blog freebie that went along with that. In case you missed that, you can snag that on my blog. We talked about preparing yourself, and then we talked about preparing your materials that you need to. So tonight, we are going to talk about all the things that happen at the table. The magic, right? Because that's where they really learn to just become great readers and where we get to watch them just blossom. So tonight we're going to talk about what our table looks like. We're going to talk about what is happening at the table and what is not happening at the table. And then we're going to talk about what a 20-minute guided reading lesson looks like. So first, let's talk about what my table looks like. This is all about the setup. My kids know what to expect, and they know how to come to the table because, as I talked about last week, we spent a lot of time practicing coming to the table, and we spent a lot of time setting those expectations so that they know what it looks like, and that transition from the carpet or from their station to our table is seamless. I always have a clean table. Now, if you walk in my classroom at the end of the day, if you were to have walked in my classroom at the end of the day, you may not have seen a clean guided reading table, and that is okay. But I'm talking about while I'm doing my guided reading lesson, because the reality is, if you walk into a classroom and that guided reading table is a hot mess and it is guided reading time, guided reading is probably not happening at that table. So for me, it was important that my table was clean. So when my students came, they knew that I had prepared for that time and that I valued our time together and that it was an important time for us. And so my table was clean. They had a space to sit at. I always probably had my one pile on the side at the side of my table, but there was space for them to work on and at. I didn't want them to just be distracted by all of my stuff. I also always have a place for them to sit. So I think it was maybe my fourth year of teaching. My school didn't have enough chairs. Yeah, big problem. So I didn't have chairs that stayed at my guided reading table all of the time. And I thought, well, that's not a problem. These are first graders and we know how to do things. So we will just take our chairs from our table or our desk and bring them to my guided reading table. You guys, it was a hot mess. I mean, it worked for a little bit, but I soon found myself frustrated because it just took too much time and I felt like we were wasting too much time moving chairs back and forth. So the next school year, I bought those milk crates that you can buy at Target or at Walmart, especially during back to school time. Sometimes you can find them at the Dollar General store also. My husband cut out a piece of plywood that fit on top. I covered them with batting and then a fabric that matched my classroom. And then those were the seats that stayed around my guided reading table. Many of you may be familiar with that idea. I've seen it all over Pinterest, and that's definitely where I got the idea from. It is not my original idea, but it worked because then there were seats at my table. I've seen teachers use stools from IKEA. I've seen teachers use just different kinds of chairs that they found like at Target or at Walmart. The milk crates were great, and I loved them because they also provided extra storage. And we're teachers and we just like collect all the things all the time, so we always need extra storage. So I have a place for them to sit at my table. And I typically always have a dry erase board, marker, and eraser that is sitting out at their spot. So they know when they come to the table, these are their supplies. I also always wear some sort of item so they know that this is guided reading time and they don't need to interrupt. So I always had these silly glasses. They're paper and foam, and I got them at Hobby Lobby one summer on clearance. I've seen teachers also wear tiaras, so that would have been fun. I've seen teachers wear boas. I've seen teachers have a tap light that they tap on and off. I've also seen teachers have, sometimes the Dollar Tree during the summertime will have little like construction cones that are small, and people will sit those on their table also during the guided reading time, just so the kids know like, hey, this is not a time to interrupt me. And sometimes I would just hold up 3 fingers because like we talked about last week, my students could interrupt for blood, barf, or bathroom. And so that was just kind of like their visual reminder. Something else that I do before they come so that my table is prepared for them is that I have pre-selected a text or a book for them. That text has been chosen and it's on their instructional level, which means they can read this book at 90 to 94% accuracy. If they are reading that book at 95% accuracy or higher, that means that book is too easy for them. And so it's not a good place for them and for me to provide instruction. If they are reading that book at 89% accuracy or below, then that means that book is a frustrational level according to Fountas and Pinnell, and it's a little too hard for them. The other thing that we have to monitor closely during that time is that I have to keep in mind as I'm choosing a book for them is their comprehension. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. It's just important to remember that you want that book to be in that sweet spot. That zone of proximal development is what you're looking for, as Vygotsky calls it. Like you've got to dig back into your college classes. At least I did when I'm thinking of that stuff. I also have a lesson that has been sketched out. Now, I did not say it is planned out to a T, because as time has gone on and as you get the hang of guided reading more, I didn't plan them out to a T. I didn't have my teacher language. I did not say the students will, the teacher will. I did not have things as detailed in my lesson plans. It was more of a sketch, but I knew this is the book, these are the words I'm covering, this is the word work, these are the activities. Like I knew everything that I was doing with that text and with those students. Some people like to have every detail planned, and that's totally okay, and that is a really good thing too, especially if you know that you need that. Also remember though that your teaching point is not going to be pre-planned. So you can plan and you can sketch out your lesson plan, but that teaching point is not going to be pre-planned, because that is something that happens in the moment as you are listening to your students read. And we'll chat more about that probably next week. So now that we've talked about what my table looks like and what I've done to prepare them so that they have a spot and they know that they are welcome at my table, let's talk about what is happening at the table and what is not happening at the table. So when I'm meeting with the group, I am listening to them read. I am coaching them as they are reading. I am encouraging them. I am providing an opportunity for them to read at a level that is comfortable to them. That goes back to finding that text that is on their instructional level. I'm moving kids from group to group as needed. With guided reading, our groups are flexible, and that is often a misconception that we have about guided reading. Like, kids are not stuck in a group. They're not stuck in your number one group, or however you label or organize your groups. My groups never had anything except numbers, and only I knew those numbers. So yes, I moved kids from group to group as needed. I'm taking a running record during guided reading. We are practicing word building during guided reading. I am monitoring their accuracy and their comprehension during guided reading. And I'm giving them instruction that's within that zone of proximal development. Again, that sweet spot, because that's what we want. That's where they're really going to grow and where they're going to learn the most. And so finding that sweet spot is important. So what are we not doing at the table? We are not round robin reading. So we are not saying, you read page 1, you're going to read page 2, you're going to read page 3. No. All of the kids are reading, and they're all reading at the same time too. So I like to have them whisper read. So I will start one student first, whomever I'm doing my running record on, and then the other students will start reading soon after. Sometimes I have them whisper read in a whisper phone. I don't think I have one close right here. Sometimes I have them read in a whisper phone, and sometimes I just had them whisper read to themselves also. We are not reading a text that requires me to tell them every other word, because the reality is then that text is too hard and the student is going to get so frustrated, and that's not what we want. That means that book is not in their sweet spot. We are not doing worksheets or activity pages or recording sheets. And not that all of those are bad things, because those things have a good place and a right place in the classroom, I truly believe. But at my guided reading table, we did not do that. We interacted with the text, and we interacted with words and word building and letters. So we are not doing worksheets at my guided reading table. And we are not only reading a book either. So they're not coming to my table, reading a book, and leaving. We're doing more with that text. So what are we doing? Let's talk about that. What is happening during a 20-minute guided reading lesson? It's important to remember that when we implement the 20-minute lesson, we get here by having structure. We have put them in these groups, and we have worked on structuring those groups. It's hard to stick to 20 minutes. For me, at times, it's hard, and so I cannot do a guided reading lesson in less than 20 minutes or in 20 minutes even, unless I have a timer. I set a timer and I glance over at that timer all the time, and I'm staying on top of it, because if I have one group run over, then the next group's time is either going to be cut short, or the third group is not even going to get a chance to meet at my table because I went over too much time in both of my groups. Some people can get through a guided reading lesson in 15 minutes, and to them I say rock on, but for me it is really difficult for me to do that. So I have found that 20 minutes is my sweet spot for doing a guided reading lesson. So let's talk about the breakdown of that 20 minutes. Angela asked, do you do any echo reading during guided reading? I only did echo reading with my I almost said below level readers, but not below level. My non-readers and sometimes my level A readers I would do echo reading with. That's a good question. Thanks for asking. So let's talk about the breakdown of the 20-minute lesson. So the first 2 minutes we would do a warm-up, and so they would reread an old book. So they would come to the table with their old book that we had read in the last guided reading session. They would take it out of the baggie, they would sit, they would open it, and they would read it quietly. And then after they were done reading, then they would just quietly put it under their chair. Now, if this is the very first time that we are doing guided reading, they probably aren't coming to the table with the book. Or if they missed the last guided reading session because they were sick or something, then they're not coming to the table with the book. And so I have them not with the book from a previous guided reading lesson. So what I like to do is I like to have them get a book from their book tub, and they bring that to the table, and then that's what they warm up their brain with. That's what I could call it. I ask them to warm up their brain. Then for the next 5 minutes, we do word work. So this looks different depending on the guided reading level. Some kids, we use alphabet strips. I talked about these briefly last week. Or we use an alphabet chart, and we just go through it and we say the letters and the sounds. So for all of the vowels, we say both of the sounds. So A, and A. B, B, C, K, D, D. You get it. I don't have to go through all the sounds. So we do that. They touch and they name them all. Now, on my alphabet chart, it's only capital letters. On my alphabet strip, I have capital on the top and lowercase on the bottom. And so this was awesome as we also worked on letter ID for upper and lowercase letters. Then for some students who didn't need me to be practicing and reinforcing letters and sounds because they already had them down pat, we would go through our sight words. So by the time I meet with my first guided reading group of the year, we have already probably learned 10 sight words. Because if I'm meeting with them at, say, week 6, and we've learned 2 words a week, well, that's 12 words already that we've learned. So we are doing some word work by reading our old sight words that we've already learned. Something else that we would do during word work time was use Elkonin boxes. Here's just one that has 3 boxes, and these are a freebie in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. I can drop a link above when we're done here. And then I also have these awesome stamps that are for Elkonin boxes also. And so you could just stamp these on paper if you wanted to. I really liked just having the charts, and I would laminate it, and then we would use whatever manipulative we wanted to. Sometimes we would change them out to be something fun and seasonal. And just to change it up a little bit because, you change one little thing and they think, oh, it's a new activity. So those were some of the ideas of things we did for word work. Sometimes we would take our alphabet cards, like we would have little bitty alphabet cards, and they would sort them in ABC order. We would go through and touch them and say the sounds, and then we would use them for word building activities also, which there are some books that I love to use for them, and then sometimes I would just make my own according to the text, like that went along with the text a little bit more. Okay, so those are word work activities that we would do. So 5 minutes of word work activity. Then for the next minute or so, I would do a book introduction. So whatever book we were going to be reading, I would introduce them to it by telling them, today we're going to read a book called Dog's New Home. In this book, we're going to read about a dog who finds a new home. And of course, I'm like super enthusiastic and I'm super excited about this because I want them to be excited about the text that we're reading also. And so I introduce the book that way, and I also am going to introduce any new sight words that we might have. Sometimes I push this up and I do this during our word work time, but all I will do is simply on their dry erase board that I have already preset out at their table, I will show them the new words on flashcards that we're going to see in the book. So I might say, in this book, Dog's New Home, we're going to see the word at, and we're going to see the word was. And so we will write them 3 times fast on our board, and then we will read them 3 times fast. So I would say at, was. Then we will go on a sight word hunt in our books, and we will use this little highlight tape. It is probably my favorite, and if you just use little bitty pieces, it lasts a really long time. So I would use highlight tape, and then in their book, they would highlight all of the sight words, the new sight words that are found in the book that we have just talked about. Does that make sense? I call it a sight word hunt. And so they go through the book and they highlight them. Okay, so that's our book introduction. Then for the next 8 minutes, I set the purpose, and we do independent reading, and I take a running record. So I set the purpose by saying, today as you read, I want you to blank. So I might tell them that today as they read, I want them to work on holding the story in their head so that we can retell it after. Or today as we are reading, I want you to whatever comprehension skill or focus point you want them to have as they are reading that new text. Then they will read independently, and this is when I will have one student start, and I will just say, today I'm going to listen to Sam read. So all of the other friends know that they read with a whisper voice, sometimes in the little whisper phone. Excuse me. And then the other student that I'm listening to read, the other student that I'm listening to read will, I'll take the running record on. So I have not, at this point, I do not have a teaching point yet because I haven't listened to them read. After I listen to them read, then I will have my teaching point, because that teaching point is going to depend on how they read. So I might listen to Sam read, and we might still have some time, and so I might listen to Sam and Sarah read. But I have to keep in mind, if I'm going to do that, Sarah has probably, one, listened to the friends beside her read, as well as she has already read the text herself. So when I'm doing a running record on Sarah, it's not on a cold read like it is on Sam. So my running record on Sam is going to be a little bit more accurate because he's never read this text before, whereas Sarah has already practiced this text at least once, looked at the pictures, picture walked it, maybe we all picture walked it during our book introduction even. Forgot to mention that. We usually do picture walk, especially with my low readers or with my A, B, and C readers for sure. So just something to keep in mind as we take a running record. And also, next week, we're going to dig into running records a little bit more. I'm going to try my best to do that with you guys next week. So 8 minutes, we've set the purpose, done independent reading, and I've taken a running record. Then for the next 2 minutes, we're going to do a book summary, or we're going to have a comprehension skill focus, and this is so important. So often it's easy to say, okay, we're done reading, and now let's do our little writing piece, and then we got to wrap it up and we're done. No. We cannot forget comprehension because we have to monitor this. What happens often, well, not often, but I have noticed this in my own guided reading groups when I was in the classroom, is that sometimes I would have kids who were great readers. And by readers, I mean word callers. So they could decode the text, and they were awesome at decoding the text, but they couldn't comprehend. They couldn't give me a summary. They couldn't tell me what happened at the end. They couldn't sequence the events because they had a hard time holding the story in their head, as I liked to say. So oftentimes that meant that for that student, I would just pull them from that group and I would move them down a level. So if we were working on level C and they were having a really hard time answering comprehension questions, giving me a summary of the book, or whatever our focus may have been, then I will move them down to a level B, where the text is super easy for them to decode and they're not going to be worried about decoding the text one bit, and we're going to really focus on comprehension. So that 2 minutes of doing a book summary and comprehension is really important for you to monitor. You can't just monitor their fluency and their accuracy, so don't forget that. So, and then the last 2 minutes of our 20-minute guided reading lesson, we're going to do a quick write. And I will be the first to confess that if anything goes from my groups, if I am running out of time, this is what I leave off. And it's really hard for me to leave it off because I know it's so valuable. So we do a quick write or a guided writing activity. Oftentimes, I might give them a sentence stem, or I might ask them a question and have them write an answer. And it pertains to the book. And again, we'll use our dry erase boards for that. Sometimes we'll write them on sentence strips, and then we will break up I will cut up the sentence strips, and then they will build their sentence back together. We always share what we write, and we always celebrate their writing. This is a great time for me to also monitor their writing. Yes, I love Writer's Workshop, and I did it every day in my classroom. But then being at my table was a valuable time. And I always told my kids, if you can read it, you can write it. And if you can write it, then you can read it, which is why we would practice writing sight words and reading sight words. And we would practice writing a sentence at the end that had some of those sight words, or that had like a common phrase from our book in it as well. So I feel like that is a super quick rundown of a 20-minute guided reading lesson. I do have an entire blog post that breaks that down and might even have a little bit more detail. I really hope I didn't leave anything off, but I might have, because I feel like there's so much information. So I'll also drop that link above in the comments, above in the description, so that you guys can hop over and read that if you want to. So a lot is happening in that 20 minutes. And my advice, guys, is to just give yourself grace. There will be days that you don't get to everything in your 20 minutes because you decided to take 2 running records, or because you did word work and oh my goodness, they were really struggling with word work, and so you decided to spend extra time on word work, or you decided to spend extra time on something else in your guided reading lesson instead of getting to everything. And that's okay, that happens. You just know that the next time you meet with them, what you're going to do is you are going to make up for that. So if you didn't get to word work on the first day you're meeting with that group, the next time you meet with that group, you're going to make sure you get to word work, because what you don't want to do is leave the same thing out all of the time, because then at the end they're really missing a valuable part of guided reading. So I also know that this is only a 1-day guided reading lesson plan. So many times, lately I am reading about a 2-day guided reading lesson plan. Jan Richardson, which is another guided reading guru, is huge on this. She writes a lot about it in her book. And so next week a little bit, we're going to dig into a 2-day guided reading lesson plan. I hope to just help you guys dissect that a little bit. Because I think that's valuable, and I think that we can do more with a 2-day lesson plan than we can with a 1-day. But I also know that sometimes a 1-day lesson plan is what what we really need to do. Especially like when we are new to guided reading and we're really just trying to get a handle on things. Someday a 1-day lesson plan just really helps us simplify those things. I also know that many of you are overwhelmed when it comes to planning a guided reading lesson. I have received countless emails from you guys saying, I just don't know where to start, or nobody on my team or in my building does guided reading, which just makes me say, oh no, I'm so sad for you. And so I have heard you loud and clear, and so I have been working this summer on something to help you guys a little bit. So I have made some guided reading kits. They are not meant to last you all year long. They are meant to help guide you. I get emails from people saying, please, you're local. Can you come to my classroom? Can you model this? Can you do this? Can you just come sit with me? And I'm like, oh, I want to come sit in all of your classrooms, and I truly wish that I could. But I just can't. So for these people, or for you who are like, I just want a little bit more guidance in structuring my lesson plan, I have something for you. I have created some leveled readers, and they have everything you need. So, for example, with the leveled book, there is a 1-day lesson plan specific to that book. So your word work, your sight words, your vocabulary words that you're going to want to introduce and go over while you're introducing that book, because you don't want them to get hung up on something, is all planned out for you. Everything from your alphabet practice, your word work. I'm so sorry, this is backwards, guys. Your book introduction, setting your purpose, every piece. And there's a 1-day and there's a 2-day lesson plan. So there are 2 different options that you can look at. Each leveled kit, so there's a level A kit, a level B kit, level C will come out in July, and level D will come out in August. Each kit has 6 books, and each of those books has everything that you need to implement a guided reading group on that level. So again, this is not meant to be something that you do all by yourself all year long. It's meant to be a tool to help you get started. I would have loved this my first year of guided reading, because I just felt like I was swimming so much, when if somebody had shown me like, here it is, then I could have just followed that outline in that template from there on out, and it would have made things so much easier for me. So those are available on my Teachers Pay Teachers store, Amanda Richardson, and there is a growing bundle for levels A through D, and then there's also just level A and just level B right now. Level C is coming in July and D in August, and I hope to expand from there, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, y'all have asked some good questions, and I wanted to answer some of these live if I could, and then if I can't get to them all, I am going to hang around after, and I'm going to answer them in the comments. So my other students, while I'm pulling a guided reading group, my other students are doing literacy stations, and we are going to talk about that in more detail in 2 weeks. So Jamie, come back because we're going to talk about how I launch them and what that time looks like in my classroom. Yes, Nikki, if you are doing a 2-day lesson plan, you are using the same book for both lessons. And we'll dissect that a little bit more next week too. Yes, Jolie, I do send home a new book every time they come to my table, except if I'm doing a 2-day lesson plan, then I'm not going to. But I really strive to send home a new book every time. And then I think somebody asked if I do send the books home, and the answer is yes. So this is my cheap way of doing it. I just put them in a gallon Ziploc baggie. I put a label that says property of our school, return daily. I slap a piece of packing tape over it, and if they lose the baggie, it's replaceable. If they lose the book, I really like to send home the paper ones from Reading A to Z, or like these are from my guided reading kits. They are replaceable, but I really try to teach them how to be responsible. The other thing you can do to send them home is use like these super awesome and durable nylon packs. But also I think like what I loved about the gallon Ziploc baggie is that it folded over in half so easy, and it just fit in their pocket of their take-home folder. So that was awesome. Okay. I don't have a sample 2-day plan, Mandy, but we're going to talk about that next week. Great question. And so maybe I'll try to get something together tangible that you can have or look at for that. Good question, Mandy. Thanks. Do they get to keep the books? Oh, good question, Cecilia. Okay, so they take the book home. After they take the book home, when they bring it back, after they read it at my table to warm their brain up, when they're done, that book goes in their book tub that they use during independent reading time, because it is a text that I know they can read. I have sent it home, and I have set them up for success when I have sent it home, because I sent home a book that I know they could read and that they have read already with me at my table. And then it goes in their book tub. And so all of the books, not all of them, most of the books in their independent reading book tub are all easy books for them to read. So no reason for kids to be like rolling around on the floor and playing hide and go seek in the corner or whatever other crazy shenanigans they try to have happen during literacy station. They have books in their book tub that are ready and that are good for them. Okay, Tracy, I can remind you, Tracy, I will drop a link above too where you can you can sign up for a text message reminder. So I sent out like over 200 text message reminders to people who wanted a reminder. So that's great. Is the book you work with in the guided reading group the same book you send home? Yes, Emily, good question. If we read it that day, that's the book that's going home. So a book does not go home until they have read it with me. Now, some teachers I have heard, and I think this is a fabulous idea, they send home a book for the students to read that is on their reading level, and they also will send home a book to read that is above their independent reading level. So it would be more like on their listening level, and it's a book meant for the parents to read to them, which I think is just genius, because I have always taught in low-income schools, all except for 1 year of teaching, and my parents they oftentimes did not have a huge book selection. And so, man, I would do that in a heartbeat. I would let them check out a book, so then they would take home their guided reading book and a book from our classroom that the parent could read to them. So a book for the kid to read and a book for the parent to read. I just think that is such a genius idea. Heather, so at what point do they receive the first book? They get their first guided reading book after they come to my table the very first time. So I don't pull guided reading groups until usually week 5, for sure by week 6 of school, because I spend the first 5 weeks setting up literacy stations and doing assessments, because I have to be prepared. And if they are not busy at their stations and staying engaged in meaningful literacy activities, then I can't pull guided reading groups. So we're going to talk more about that in 2 weeks. So good question though. When do they switch out books from their personal book tub? Marcy, we what happens often in my classroom is that after their book tubs, like I would notice, hey, I am out of guided reading level A books. Like I've got to clean out tubs. So I would go usually after school sometimes and just clean out their tubs and take books out. Some teachers do book shopping, and we can talk more about that when we talk about literacy stations. I was never brave enough to do book shopping, and in hindsight, I totally wish I would have. I totally wish I would have just let them have most of my books, and I would have let them do book shopping. Okay, some of y'all have some more questions. Oh, our school is still committed to basals. Deanne, I don't know. I wish I had some really good advice for you. The last school I taught at was a fabulous school. I absolutely loved it. But everyone, for the most part, used the basal reading series. And I tried it. I did. I gave it a shot. I tried it, and I just didn't like it. I came from a place that had a really strong balanced literacy initiative, and just district-wide, like we taught with the balanced literacy model, and I didn't even know how to teach from a basal. Like I had to go observe one of my teachers do it to see how to do it. And so for me, what ended up happening was I just had a nice talk with my principal, and she was incredibly supportive of me just going off and kind of doing my same thing, my own thing. I do know that the teachers that I taught with that were able to do both, they did their whole group instruction through the basal series, and then they would use like reading A to Z books, or sometimes they would use books from our guided reading library, or sometimes they used the books, the little readers from the basal reading series. I didn't always think that they were challenging enough though, but they would use those and still have their guided reading time. Do you see your groups every day, or do you see one group a day? I strive to see 3 groups a day, Connie. I have a blog post that talks about grouping our students for guided reading groups that I just published last week. And so that is, that's there, and I talk about just kind of how I group my students and the importance of grouping and flexible grouping with our students for our guided reading groups. Okay, Casey, yes, copies. Oh, that's such an issue sometimes. Okay, so I just made a set of each book. So like, I would have 6 sets of this book, and this was the book, six books in one set. I'm sorry. And then that's the book that would go home and come back, and when I pulled it, I just put it back. So like, here's an example of like I kept them all in one Ziploc baggie, and then I kept baskets of them behind my guided reading table. And so I just I found the guided reading level A basket. If I needed a level A reader, I thumbed through there. I found a text that was appropriate and that was going to help me teach what I needed to teach that day or that week, and I pulled them. Now, the books did not stay home, and very rarely did I have to replace them. But I think that's because we spent a lot of time talking about how to care for our books, and how they were important, and they were important learning tools for us that really helped us learn how to read. So, okay, I'm going to hang around a little bit longer, and I'm going to answer your questions and comments. I'm seeing some really good questions. So I'm going to just hang around a little bit longer, and I'm going to answer your questions and comment in the comments below. Next week, we're going to chat more about a 2-day guided reading lesson plan. We might touch a little bit on what to do with our non-readers. I know if any of you are kindergarten or first grade teachers, sometimes, hopefully not in first grade, but sometimes those little kinder babies, you just don't know what to do with them as non-readers, and so we're going to chat about that a little bit more. And also next week, we're going to meet on Wednesday again. Sorry I had to change things up this week. Thanks so much for coming, but next week we're going to meet on Wednesday again, and I will post reminders on Instagram, on Facebook. I'll try to email out a reminder again, and if you sign up for a text message reminder, you'll get one an hour before the session. So thanks so much for coming, guys. I really appreciate y'all joining me, and I hope y'all have a great evening. Bye.